Hello, everyone. This is Sahar talking to you from Women's Voices Without Border podcast studio. This podcast is brought to you by AJ with the support of the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs. I'm so happy today to have with me a guest that I have been really putting on my guest list to have as one of our guests for our podcast, Miss Brenda Hershey. Brenda is an international humanitarian. She's an author, she's a researcher, and also the executive director of TRY, if I'm not mistaken. Is it right, Brenda? Mm-hmm. TRY?
Yep.
Global. Right? Yes. Welcome, Brenda. It's so good to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here.
You've been on my mind, and I told you that a few days ago when I talked with you, because so many of your work revolves around yoga and trauma recovery. So I know that you have an extensive experience in trauma recovery through yoga, and you have worked in conflict zones. And today I want us to talk about mental health, yoga, and really its importance in conflict zones and in post-conflict zones. So I want to hear from you, Brenda. You're originally from Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
So how did you start with yoga, and how did you end up here in Kurdistan?
So, I took my very first yoga class when I was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think like many people, the first many classes that I took, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. They were in nice studios in Chicago. And I really felt that it was a physical practice and I needed to get all of the movements right. Mm-hmm. And so my focus was very external. It was about how it looked.
Yeah.
So I tried out.
And it's intimidating.
It can be very intimidating, yes. Even if you have all the right clothes and you're in the right place and everything, it can still be very intimidating. And so I tried out different types of yoga and eventually really found my groove and found a type of practice that really resonated with me. And like most people who are consistent and continue practicing yoga, because I felt there was a lot of value in it for me, the practice moved gradually from physical to a much more mental practice. It became a moving meditation for me. And so I fell in love with yoga. And then my story with trauma recovery yoga begins in 2019. Mm-hmm. And that's where things really took a turn for me because trauma recovery yoga married these two passions that I had of yoga, because it'd been so healing for me, and just regulating. And it's not about getting good at yoga. That's not the purpose of practicing. It's about getting good at life. It's taking the mindfulness, the breathing techniques, the self-regulation, the balance that you feel on the mat, off the mat.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
You know, Brenda, you started TRY Global. TRY, as you said, it refers to trauma recovery through yoga. But I want to understand from you a little bit more, what does trauma really mean? Because this has been a trending word lately. So everyone is saying, I'm traumatized from this, I'm traumatized from that. But what does the word trauma really refers to?
Very important question. And it was about this time that I was introduced to trauma recovery yoga, or TRY, that I learned for myself, because also for me it was just an overused trendy word. So trauma is any deeply distressing or disturbing experience that overwhelms your ability to cope with or handle it. So anything that really knocks you off balance and disorients you, let's say. And we have
Should you be conscious about it, Brenda, or is it sometimes unconscious?
Like the experience?
Yeah, like if someone has experienced trauma, does he have the conscious to say, like, I've been traumatized from this incident, or not necessarily?
There are so many elements to trauma. There's acute trauma, like maybe it's a one-time event, maybe it's an ongoing event, maybe you've experienced multiple big T traumatic experiences. It could be accidents. It could be emotional abuse, or so on. So I think it's really different for every person. But generally, when we experience something traumatic, and actually I'll just note that there's a difference between stress and trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, stress is usually shorter term. We're more able to cope with it. And not all stress is bad. I mean, good and bad are
Of
very
course. Stress at the end, it
subjective
helped
terms.
us to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we have resources to come back to baseline, to regulate our bodies or to calm our bodies, then we become more resilient. We're better able to handle stress and trauma. It goes for both. But traumatic situations can be much more overwhelming. And in a traumatic experience, one can quickly become disconnected from their body or very disoriented. They might feel like they're experiencing the situation from outside of themselves. And so it could be, if you have resources to regulate in the moment, it could be a more conscious experience. Or it could quickly become an unconscious experience that you're not able to even to recollect afterwards, just because of what's happening in the brain and body at the time.
So not everyone who has a trauma truly or consciously knows that he has experienced a trauma.
Definitely, yeah. Especially when we have little awareness about what trauma is and what happens in your body as a result. Because it's not the event itself. It's what trauma is, what happens in your body as a response or reaction to the event. It's what's going on in your body and how that continues to impact you. So if you don't understand the basic concepts of what happens in your body during trauma and how it could stay with you, then it can stay with you for your entire life. Also, we're wired for survival.
Yeah.
So our bodies and brains are really amazing in this way, but they can work against us. Things that made sense at one point to get us to, or to allow us to survive a traumatic experience, especially if it was something ongoing, like for women living in conflict zones or working in conflict zones, those same adaptive coping mechanisms become maladaptive.
Can you please elaborate more on that?
Yes. So there's this metaphor that I love that helped me really understand this better. So if you are an airplane, imagine you're an airplane and you're flying through the sky, and the sky is blue, the weather is nice, you're just flying along. But then suddenly the clouds start to get darker. You need to, and it gets a bit windy. So you put down some extra flaps on the wings of the plane. This is not technically accurate whatsoever. But you put down some extra flaps. Don't Google if this is accurate or not. But the idea is you put down some extra flaps to support you to get through the wind. And then because it's so dark, you turn on the high beams, like the brighter lights, so you can see. So these things are necessary for you to get through this storm. But then, once the storm has passed and the sun is out, those bright lights might kind of shine off the sun or the clouds that are there and like kind of blind you. And the extra flaps might weigh you down. So they're not helpful anymore. In fact, they can be hurtful.
Okay, so they are helpful only in specific situation and when we need them. But the thing is that we continue using these methods that we're adapted to. Did I understand that correctly?
Exactly.
Brenda?
Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting.
And even if you think about I might not need these now anymore, because of your lived experience, you don't want to be caught off guard. You don't want another unpredictable traumatic situation to happen, because you never know when trauma might happen. That's one of the characteristics of a traumatic event. It's unpredictable. So you never know when another storm will come. So you just want to be prepared, stay prepared. But yeah, these things.
So it's can we say it's like you're in a fight mode the whole time?
Yes.
Or waiting for something bad to happen?
Exactly.
the whole time.
Even if you're not consciously waiting for something bad to happen, your body might just stay in this survival state or a fight, flight, freeze state to make sure you're prepared to survive whatever happens next. So unless you have resources and support to help calm your body, regulate your nervous system, which just means to bring balance into your brain and body, then you could easily stay, especially in conflict or post-conflict zones, stay in this heightened alert survival state.
How does, Brenda, how does the brain and the body, because we're always talking about this relationship between the brain and the body, like what's the relationship and how can they both, communicate or work together to give us this regulation?
So it's all so connected, our mind, our body, and one of the, you can't, a mental experience is also a physical experience, and so on.
Yeah.
One of the main ways that we support people to regulate their nervous system is through mind-body practices. So they're just different holistic, simple practices that work mainly with breath work, mindfulness, and movement. So you're incorporating all the mental and physical elements to bring balance. One of the main ways we do this, I'll just speak a little science, because one of the ways that Try has been so well received, especially in the Middle East, but around the world, is because we say we speak science, not Sanskrit. So one of our, we really emphasize the science. And it's a language that everyone can speak, right?
Yeah.
So one of the scientific pillars of Try that speaks to the mind-body connection and strengthens the mind-body connection is using the vagus nerve.
What is the vagus nerve?
The vagus nerve is also vagal toning. It's a very trendy term these days.
Oh, really?
That's really important to understand, because if you understand...
I'm going to write it down.
Oh, yeah. This is worth looking a bit further into.
Yeah, we'll Google it right after this podcast.
Good. I recommend everyone Google vagal toning.
Yeah.
Because if you understand how to strengthen your vagus nerve, which we can do through very simple tools, techniques, I'll give some examples. Then you understand why you have to include the body in trauma recovery. It's absolutely essential. So the vagus nerve is the largest cranial nerve in your body. It runs from your brainstem into your face, your tongue, your throat, into your heart, your lungs, and into every major organ in your body. So it's basically from like the top into your entire torso. It branches off. And it has a few really important jobs that can help us understand why it's so effective to strengthen. And the first is that it brings balance into two branches of your nervous system, your sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is your stress response and your rest, digest response. So preparing you to either handle a threat, danger, trauma, or to it prepares you to like relax, basically, to sit down, to meditate, to any time that you don't need to be in a heightened state. So we have these two branches of the nervous system, and the vagus nerve brings balance into both. We don't want to be stressed all the time, but we don't want to be too relaxed all the time either. You want to be able to have balance to respond to your environment.
I see that, yeah.
So the vagus nerve is in charge of this balance, which is incredibly important. Oftentimes with trauma survivors, or even especially women in conflict or post-conflict zones, we might stay in this heightened state, this stress response.
So have you seen that like firsthand through your experience with Try Global?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about it? Like, what do you do in Try Global? How did you feel it has impacted your trainees and the people you work with?
Absolutely. So we work with a lot of people. Well, let me introduce the organization
Please
a bit
do.
more.
Yeah. And how the Try method started at first, because you were telling me, and it was such significant story.
Yeah, let me start there. So the Try method, so Try again is trauma recovery yoga, it's a science-based somatic or body-focused therapy that's comprised of trauma-informed breathwork, meditation, mindfulness, and movement. And it's all pieced together into a yoga sequence. We have a few different yoga sequences. But we mainly serve through the yoga classes, through shorter practices like breath work, meditation, self-regulation. And so it's more than just yoga, it's nervous system regulation. So when you expand your understanding of yoga and these different types of practices as nervous system regulation, it's a lot more relatable and practical for people, especially in conflict and post-conflict.
So you do work like with the refugees?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are working here we're based here in Kurdistan, but we work in the U.S., in Egypt, Jordan, the occupied Palestinian territories, and we work with refugees, displaced people, local host communities, and also like humanitarians, CEOs of companies. I mean, everyone can use nervous system regulation tools.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. But that's mainly who we're working with here, and mostly women as well. And we serve through customized workshops, trainings like trauma recovery yoga teacher trainings, and classes, the yoga classes for both children and adults.
Ah, okay, nice. So you do offer like a training for people to become trainers in TRY, right?
Yes.
And how can one sign up to these trainings?
Well, we now have a really convenient option for people that makes it a lot more accessible to become certified in TRY, which is an online self-paced TRY teacher training. We have two. One is to get certified to teach adults, and one is to get certified to teach children.
And how can people access this? Do you have like a sort of platform or on your social media account?
You can find information on our social media. So the handle is just Try Global.
Okay, so you need to follow TRY Global, right?
Yes, exactly. And yeah, maybe we can include the link as well.
We will
in
do
the
that,
information.
definitely, yeah.
To take you directly to the page. So this is the sequence, and it started because one of the creators of Try in the U.S. in 2016, after the traumatic loss of her son, she developed complex PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And she was a yoga teacher. She'd been for a long time, but after her PTSD diagnosis, she went back to yoga classes in an attempt, to feel better and to ease her symptoms. But she found that leaving the classes, she was a lot more triggered than when she went. She felt really anxious leaving yoga. And
why would that happen, Brenda? Because I also have seen that you have published something around this topic on your Instagram account. How can yoga, for instance, re-trigger trauma?
So there are a lot of ways that teachers can unintentionally trigger people in the class. For example, if the teacher is walking around the room, it can make people feel uneasy. If they touch or adjust them, whether they've asked for permission or not, but oftentimes they're not even asking for consent, they'll just touch them. It can also make people feel like, they can't get it right. They don't know how to to do this. It can, make people feel like they're not in charge of their experience. If a teacher comes to the class like in a rush, one thing that we really preach is co-regulation. So our nervous systems are communicating constantly. And so the nervous system of the teacher, so that just means how they're breathing, how they're speaking, are their shoulder, like, do they look tense?
So it does directly affect
yeah,
your
it's
students?
like contagious.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is in a yoga class or in any situation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So even now, if I were really nervous recording this podcast and my breathing was really shallow and I was like sweating and I was visibly like nervous, you would feel less at ease. Yeah. You would also feel a little bit more nervous.
And I'm feeling actually very calm. And I think it's because of your energy, Brenda. Yeah.
Good. And I feel the same because of your energy. So we also train our instructors to understand the power of self-regulation for a teacher and how just coming to the class regulated is doing something. And then there are some other very practical things, like we don't turn lights off in a class. So we don't want the space to be dark. We want the space to be private, so there aren't people walking outside of windows or open doors. We don't play music in a tri class because you never know what will trigger someone. It could be words, it could be lyrics, it could be songs without lyrics. Once in a different type of yoga class, it was piano music that triggered someone in a class that I was in. So you never know, and we just cater to the better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we make sure participants can see the door, like their backs are not to a door in the yoga class. So just in case someone goes in or out, that could be triggering. So it's a lot of different things that might seem small, but one of those things could be what triggers someone. And you never want someone to leave your presence activated. That's kind of one of our...
What does activated mean? Does it mean triggered also?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is how the main idea started with the founder itself of the Try method, right?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for bringing me back. So, yeah, she was going to classes feeling triggered because of these types of things.
Yeah.
And she didn't know exactly that it was because of this at first. She connected the dots, but she went home after some of these classes and started to piece together a yoga sequence that felt empowering for her, with the specific breathing techniques, the postures, the movements, the meditations, because meditation was very triggering for her. She couldn't be left alone in silence. And that's very relatable for other participants that we have worked with as well. She used positive affirmations. She, didn't play music. So she just incorporated all of these things into what became the trauma recovery yoga main sequence.
And you brought this to Kurdistan,
yes,
right, Brenda?
Yeah.
How did you feel like? Was there a sort of resistance from the Iraqi population, or did they accept it and they were, very cooperative?
Interestingly, there was very little resistance, but I think solely because we're emphasizing science, both when we present the yoga classes and when we're facilitating the yoga classes. We're not using any Sanskrit or spiritual language. That's not a part of what we're bringing with trauma recovery yoga specifically. But we really emphasize the science. What's happening in your body when we do this posture or this breathing technique? What's the science behind it? How can it help you feel better? And it's because of this scientific understanding paired with consistent practice that that we've seen significant improvements in people's physical trauma symptoms, mental trauma symptoms.
Wow.
Yeah, their heart rate variability, which means their vagus nerve is becoming stronger.
Wow.
And their resilience levels. So they're better able to handle stress and trauma before it happens. So we've measured this impact. But it's really these two pieces that make that possible.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, Brenda. I wanted to ask you, maybe this is a really weird question or a little bit different. Do they give like these yoga classes in Kurdish or in English?
It's a great question.
Because, I once attended, because I'm Lebanese, so in Lebanon, most of the yoga classes are given in English. And for some weird reasons, when I took a yoga class in Arabic, I found it very weird and I couldn't really relate. So is language something important that you really take into consideration when you're giving these classes?
Yes, this is a really important point, and it speaks to one of the 4 principles of TRI, which is accessibility.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've heard very similar or the same experiences as what you just described, because often when people have access to yoga, if they're going to a yoga studio, things are taught in English, even here in the Middle East.
Yes.
Yeah. But we are working, one of our mottos is meeting people where they are. And we're working within communities where usually English is not a second language spoken. Just, like here in Kurdistan, for example, it's Arabic or Kurdish. And it's one of the dialects of Kurdish. We work with Sorani speakers, with Badini speakers.
Wow, so you have it customized to that extent.
Yes. So all of our, our in-person workshops and trainings depending on the population or the group, is in their local language. So we have either live interpreters. We have live interpreters, and all of our content is translated into these languages, including the tutorial videos that they're learning from.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, so they're learning in their own language and they're teaching in their community in their own language.
In their own language.
Yeah.
Because you want to be convinced really with something very new coming to our community. You need someone you can relate to, not a new technique in a new language. And as you said, it makes it much more accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brenda, I want to get a little bit more personal and I want some really practical tips, and I'm going to talk about my own experience. And I'm talking about my own experience here, Brenda, because I know that this is the experience of many of my friends in my community. So a lot of us, they tell us that yoga helps with mental health, movement helps with mental health, breathing techniques helps with mental health. But for example, I have not felt this direct positive impact from yoga. I haven't been consistent, to tell you the truth. But also whenever I try to do the breathing techniques or the meditation, I feel so intimidated, because whenever I'm thinking about not thinking, I start getting obsessed about thinking about not thinking. And I feel it's so hard, so I give all this up. So can you really tell us, is it something that anyone can really do, or it's, for instance, specially made? It's a calling that somebody can do and other people cannot do.
I think it's very relatable, as you said. This experience, especially with meditation, I think movement can feel a bit more accessible to people, but to sit and this idea, let me ask you first, what does meditation look like to you?
Honestly, the first meditation class I took, it was so scary. And yesterday I was actually discussing with Billy. I think she had the same experience. So it's really scary to stay with yourself and not think about anything. It triggers something that I do not know, but it's an uncomfortable feeling. So for me, how I understand meditation, and again, I'm ignorant. I'm kind of ignorant in these
but
things.
I ask
I'm not
I
very
think it's
aware.
Super relatable as well.
So what I think about meditation is breathing techniques and focusing on my breathing. And I really try to do it.
And clearing your mind.
If I can, but I
Like,
cannot
that's
do
that's
that,
the goal?
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do my breathing techniques the way my friend taught me, because she's also a therapist. She taught me to do these breathing techniques, and I try to focus on my breathing. But for some reason, I can never focus on one thing. It's focusing on not focusing on so many things. So I directly give it up. So give me any tip to start with meditating, because I really, really need it right now.
Yeah, so relatable. I think a lot of people have a specific idea in mind about what meditation is, like that it's clearing your mind, it's not having thoughts. It's like emptying your mind. And whether that includes breathing and whatever type of breathing, there are just so many types of breathing techniques, of meditation, of yoga even, that I think often we can have an idea of what this looks like or what it's supposed to look like, when in reality we have to diversify how we think about these techniques. So I'll just speak for these trauma-informed techniques like meditation, breathing, and yoga, because this is what works in our experience with people in crisis, with people in conflict and post-conflict zones. The trauma-informed aspect is really, really important in order for it to resonate with them. But also just for people navigating this world, because we're surrounded by, even if, we're not in one of these crisis situations ourselves, we're surrounded by crisis. And
Of course.
Our nervous system, as I mentioned, we're constantly co-regulating. Our nervous system doesn't know the difference whether you're sitting in front of me or I'm looking at you on a screen. So all that we're taking in on social media,
Exactly.
all of these horrific images and videos, they're really affecting us.
Yeah, and honestly, Brenda, it has been, I feel that this is a therapy session, Brenda, thank you. It has been affecting us in the office, like me and my colleagues, we're always talking how much what's happening in the region is really affecting us on all levels. Like, for example, especially me, because like I'm from Lebanon and I see what my parents, what my family, what my friends are passing through, and I feel that I'm safe. So I also have this survival skill that, okay, I'm far, but why do they have to pay the price and I'm safe? So and I feel stuck. And the same thing honestly applies to all of us. So this is something that many, many, many people in the region are passing through this year and the past few years.
Yeah, I feel that. And I think all of us have our own personal, like, the layers to our experiences. Because even being an American and being here in the Middle East or wherever, the guilt and the confusing type of guilt that I feel is also like part of my experience and my responsibility in my own personal activism in all that's happening, which we can also kind of touch on in a moment. But some practical tips for anyone that resonates with what you said about not being able to stick with meditation or breathing, or just, if it hasn't worked and you've tried it, or if you haven't tried it because you feel it just won't work for you.
So yeah, for the beginners, some tips for the very beginners.
Yes, and we're mainly working with beginners, so I feel this really. So often, in Try, we don't leave people in silence for more than about 10 seconds. And often our idea of meditation is sitting in silence, or it's doing a little breath work and then being in silence. But because of trauma and its impact on us and the long-lasting impact it can have, we can feel unsafe in our bodies. It's not just unsafe in the environment around us. We can feel really unsafe in our bodies unconsciously.
So maybe this is why we feel triggered.
Yeah, sitting in silence is like it can be a nightmare in many cases. Yeah, or just maybe it's this feeling of discomfort that you can't name. But maybe it has something to do with this. So in Try, we do what we call micro cueing. We, even if it's after almost 10 seconds, we'll say something, inhale, exhale. but it's never fully silent.
Yeah.
We use positive affirmations and, differentiating from toxic positivity, but like genuine, authentic affirmations that can help someone absorb these different types of thoughts, let's say. So we're sprinkling in affirmations, visualizations throughout the class that are also proven to help people especially in recovery. But that, and I think the most important thing, one of the most important practices that we use in TRI that has proven really effective in helping people feel better is self-regulation. So when we experience trauma, and even before
trauma... So when
trauma,
you talk about self-regulation, is it emotional regulation? Does that mean the same?
Yes, it helps in emotional regulation. So when we feel, or when we experience trauma, we can become dysregulated. So I'll start with the opposite first, which means your nervous system is out of balance. Your mind-body connection becomes out of balance. And so they're just simple tools that I can take you through. How does that show
in your body? Like, what are the symptoms of being dysregulated?
So it can show emotionally.
I'm diagnosing myself.
No, this is great because there are just so many things we can talk about. And I want to make sure that audience members leave feeling like they have some practical tools as well. So maybe we can end this with a short self-regulation practice.
It would be perfect.
Okay, great.
Brenda,
Good. So when we become dysregulated, that can show emotionally, behaviorally, physically. And basically, it's our inability to control our emotional, behavioral, physical responses in a way that's appropriate for the situation you're in. We talked about the airplane and adaptive coping mechanisms turning into maladaptive. So when you become dysregulated and you don't have tools to regulate, like to self-regulate then, you can stay in this activated state, this heightened alert state. And this is being dysregulated.
So it might show in anxiety and anger, uncontrollable anger maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Not being able to respond to a situation in a way that's appropriate. Also, it could be chronic muscle tension, headaches, stomach aches. It can show physically. Mentally, you could feel really scattered, not be able to concentrate, have problems with short or long-term memory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there are many layers to it. And this also speaks to the mind-body connection and how trauma it affects us on every level. So self-regulation, the opposite of this dysregulation, is the foundation of our practices. We'll do a practice in a little bit that just walks us through some of the basics of very simple but effective ways to bring you back to the present moment and bring you back to your body. Because for women in conflict and post-conflict zones, it's not about rolling out your yoga mat and doing yoga. I mean, we have more space and time and safety to do that in post-conflict zones. But still, and especially for if you are in active conflict, I would say self-regulation is more of the practice that you want, that you have access to, first of all, and that will be more effective even.
Can you give us okay, I'm speaking Arabic. Can you give us some tips, Brenda? Like, for example, let's say I woke up today very anxious, very disconnected, or with a foggy brain and everything. What is something that I can do to better self-regulate?
So you could move your body.
Okay, so movement.
Okay. You could self-regulate. We'll also include a link that has videos for the self-regulation practice, for some different meditations and breathing techniques.
Okay.
All based in science and psychology. This is also one of the things about our practices. Very simple tools that once you learn how to do this breath or this one, like you can use it anytime. It's like teaching a man to fish.
Okay.
Yeah, then he, can continue to fish by himself.
Okay, so these are like tips that people need to use daily, let's say, or constantly. So
As consistently as you can. Yeah. It's the consistent practice that not only helps you feel better, but builds your resilience. So when something happens in the future, your body remembers how to do it. You build muscle memory, and your body will just naturally start, notice your breath or be able to feel your feet on the floor. And it could be this millisecond or this moment that brings you back to your body so that you can not become disconnected or have an unconscious experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we said meditation, breathing techniques, and movements. Three important things.
And whatever feels accessible to you at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to do a 45-minute yoga class. In fact, this is often not realistic. But any of these shorter practices that you can do, and we'll provide a lot of resources
we'll
with the
definitely
podcast.
include them in the description of our podcast.
Yeah.
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 Brenda, I wanted to ask you also if someone is in a war situation. You have talked about that before. They are in the middle of the conflict. What are things that they can do?
Well, if we focus on accessibility and what makes sense for someone, in a conflict zone, it's not rolling out the yoga mat and doing a yoga class.
So maybe breathing techniques?
Yes, your breath is your most powerful regulator of stress, and it's available to you always. So even
Can you
just
teach
noticing
us something very basic, a breathing technique
Yes.
that is very basic that we
Sure.
can use?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can do a box breath.
Okay. What is it called? Box press?
Box breath.
Oh, breath. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about it first, and then we can do it together.
Okay. Ladies, you can do the breathing with us also.
Great. So it's really easy and really effective.
Okay.
It quickly calms your body, which will calm your mind. So it calms your stress response system. So what we'll do is all happening in and out of your nose. We'll inhale for a count of 3. We'll do 3.
Okay.
Hold your breath for 3. Exhale for 3. Hold for 3.
Okay. 3, 3, 3. It's
Yeah.
even important to remember. It's easy to remember.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're more visual, as you breathe, you can think of it like you're drawing a box. Like inhale 3, hold 3, exhale 3, hold 3.
Okay.
Okay. So sit
Let's try.
comfortably.
Okay. Very comfortable.
First, we'll exhale and then inhale to begin. 2, 3, hold. 2, 3, exhale. 2, 3, hold. 2, 3. Inhale through the nose. 2, 3, hold. 2, 3, exhale. 2, 3, hold. 2, 3. Inhale. Do this one more time and count to yourself. And then, whenever you finish, breathe naturally.
Wow. So we can do that every day and it will help us more. Such a simple exercise, honestly.
Yes, and I do this before I'm like giving a speech or doing something that I feel a little nervous about. And it really quickly calms your body because you'll notice your heart's racing.
Yeah, I
Maybe your
noticed
palms
that.
are sweaty. But through your breath, so for women in conflict zones, when the environment is unsafe around you, coming back to your breath, even just tracing your inhales and exhales, like noticing how you're breathing, it's the way to bring you back to your body.
It's wonderful, Brenda. Thank you so much. I want to end this podcast with one question. So I want to see, is it far-fetched when we say that yoga can result in peace in communities and societies? What's your take on that?
I feel that community peace, let's say, community development and community activism, community awareness starts with all of that on the personal level. And I think a lot of the conflict and violence and all that we're experiencing in the world today that feels really dark and heavy is rooted in personal trauma that's just been projected onto a collective scale. And so if we can start with the individual and start with ourselves, bringing balance into our brains and bodies so that we're more connected with ourselves, when you understand trauma, you become more compassionate. When you become trauma informed, you can understand the underlying why of your own behavior, the behavior of others. And so you really, truly become more compassionate with yourself and with others. And I think if we can get to this place on a personal level, it emanates on a collective scale. Mm-hmm. And so community peace, I think, definitely starts with, it can be yoga, it can be mindfulness, it can be breathing, it can be whatever kind of social connection or resources help regulate you. But it does start with us.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for this insightful discussion. With these powerful and positive words, I end my podcast today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really send my thoughts today to everyone passing through conflict in our region, in our countries, and even in the whole wide world, sending them lots of peace from us and lots of prayers that they heal their traumas and their tragedy and finally find peace. Thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you for having me.